You just got offered $200,000 a year. You're 22, and right now, sitting in this office at 3 in the morning, you're not sure if it was the best decision of your life or the worst. But let's go back to the beginning. Because nobody just walks into investment banking. This story starts years before your first day on the desk. You're a sophomore at a target school. Maybe it's Wharton, maybe it's Columbia or NYU Stern. The point is, your university is on a very specific list, and if your school isn't on that list, you're already swimming upstream. The top 15 target schools produce roughly half of all investment banking hires at the major firms. Half, from 15 schools. So you join the finance club. You spend your Tuesday nights in a basement classroom learning how to build discounted cash flow models. You practice stock pitches over and over until you can walk someone through your investment thesis in your sleep. While your friends are out at parties, you're building Excel models for companies you've never heard of. You compete in stock pitch competitions against kids from Harvard and Princeton. You read Wall Street Oasis forums until 2 a.m., memorizing technical interview questions. You learn what WACC stands for before most of your classmates know what an income statement is. And then comes the part nobody teaches you in class, networking. You send hundreds of cold emails to alumni working at banks. Most don't reply, but the ones who do, you meet for coffee. 30-minute conversations where you try to sound smart without sounding desperate. You have dozens of these, each one a performance. Every follow-up email is crafted like a cover letter. Every thank you note is sent within 12 hours. Because in this world, one referral from the right person can mean the difference between getting an interview and getting ghosted. Junior year, the recruiting cycle officially begins. But honestly, it started 18 months ago when you sent your first cold email. Everything you've done, every club, every coffee chat, every late night, it was all building to this moment. You attend every information session, you shake every recruiter's hand, you ask questions you already know the answer to, just to make them remember your face. This is the game, and you're all in. 347 applications. Goldman Sachs, JPMorgan, Morgan Stanley, Bank of America, Citi, Evercore, Lazard, Moelis, every bulge-bracket, every elite boutique, every bank you've ever heard of, and a dozen you haven't. First come the higher view interviews. You sit in your dorm room, talking to a camera, no human on the other side, no facial reactions, no follow-up questions, just an algorithm analyzing your word choice, your tone, and whether your face looks confident enough. You practice your higher view answers 40 times. You adjust the lighting, you change your shirt, you record and re-record until you hate the sound of your own voice, and then you submit it and wait. Then the rejections start rolling in. We regret to inform you, after careful consideration, we will not be moving forward with your application at this time. Each one a little punch to the gut. Goldman, rejected after higher view. Morgan Stanley, rejected after first round. JPMorgan, complete silence, not even a rejection. You start wondering if the last 2 years of your life were a complete waste of time, and the worst part is watching other people get offers. Your roommate got Goldman Sachs. The kid from your finance club got Evercore. Everyone's celebrating, and you're refreshing your inbox every 10 minutes, getting nothing. You feel like the only person who didn't make it. But then one email changes everything. First round interview, Bank of America Securities. Your hands are shaking when you open it. You read it 3 times to make sure it's real. You spend the next 5 days preparing like your life depends on it. Walk me through a DCF. What's the difference between enterprise value and equity value? How does depreciation affect the 3 financial statements? You drill every technical question until the answers come out automatically. You practice behavioral questions in the shower. You barely sleep. First round, 2 30-minute interviews back to back. 1 behavioral, 1 technical. You sit across from people who do this for a living, and you try to convince them that you belong. The technical goes perfectly. You walk through the DCF like you've done it 1,000 times, because you have. But then the behavioral. Tell me about a time you failed. You stumble. You recover, but you know it wasn't clean. You walk out of that building, replaying that one answer over and over in your head. 2 weeks of silence. Every time your phone buzzes, your heart rate spikes. Every email notification makes you stop what you're doing, but it's never the one you're waiting for, and then it comes. Super Day invitation. This is the final round. The one that separates the candidates from the bankers. 5 back-to-back interviews in a single day, 3 to 5 hours straight. No real breaks between them, just you, your suit, and everything you've been working toward for 2 years. 8 a.m. You walk into a floor full of candidates who all look exactly like you. Same dark suit, same nervous energy, same leather portfolio. 5 different rooms, 5 different interviewers, each one testing you on technicals, market trends, deal knowledge, and whether you can handle the pressure without cracking. By room 3, you're running on pure adrenaline. By room 5, You can barely remember what you said in room 1. You walk out at 1 p.m., 5 hours, 5 interviews. They said you'd hear back within 24 hours. That's the longest 24 hours of your entire life. And then the phone rings. Unknown number, New York area code. Hi, this is Sarah from Bank of America Recruiting. We'd like to extend you a full-time offer for our investment banking analyst program, $110,000 base salary, $10,000 signing bonus. You'll start in July. You can barely speak. You just say thank you about 15 times. You hang up, and you just sit there, staring at the wall. You're in. July, your first day at one of the biggest banks on Wall Street. You're part of a class of 80 analysts, all starting on the same day. All of you hired from the best schools in the country. All of you hungry, and all of you absolutely terrified. 6 weeks of training, 8 hours a day in a classroom. Accounting, valuation methods, financial modeling. They hand you a 500-page binder and tell you to know every page by the end of the program. They teach you how to build a DCF from a blank spreadsheet, how to pull comparable company multiples, how to run precedent transaction analysis, and most importantly, they teach you how to format a pitch book so perfectly that a single misaligned margin, a wrong font size, or a logo that's 2 pixels off center could get you screamed at by a managing director. But training isn't all bad. You bond with your analyst class, you go out for drinks after sessions, you complain about the accounting module together. You make friends who will become the only people who truly understand what you're about to go through, because nobody outside of banking will ever get it. These 80 people are your platoon, and you're about to go to war together. Then training ends, and they put you on the desk. Your group, your team, your Bloomberg terminal, 3 monitors, a phone with 6 lines. This is where you'll spend the next 2 to 3 years of your life. Within your first hour, you meet the staffer. This is the person who assigns you to deals and pitches. Which managing directors you work for, which clients you support, how many hours you'll sleep tonight. It all runs through this one person. Your entire existence now revolves around their staffing decisions. Your first real task arrives before lunch. A managing director needs a full comparable company analysis for 15 companies. Client meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. You've done this dozens of times in training, but training gave you 3 days. This time you have 6 hours. And this time, if you get a number wrong, a managing director will present incorrect data to a CEO, and everyone will know whose model it came from. You finish at 9 p.m., you think that's a long day, you text your friend, this job is intense. You have absolutely no idea what's coming, because this was the easy part. 3:12 a.m., your managing director just emailed you 47 comments on a pitch book. The client meeting is at 9. That gives you less than 6 hours to address every single one, reformat the entire deck, and print 20 bound copies before the MD walks in. Comment 14. The logo on page 7 is 3 pixels too far to the left. Comment 23. This font is 12 point. It should be 11. Comment 31. The blue in this chart doesn't match the blue on the cover page. Half of these comments are formatting. All of them are non-negotiable. This is what they call a fire drill. An MD needs something done immediately, and you drop everything to make it happen. It doesn't matter that you were already working on 2 other live deal projects. It doesn't matter that you were supposed to leave at midnight. The fire drill is the only thing that exists now, and you'll have one of these at least twice a week. Dinner is a $30 seamless order, eaten at your desk with one hand while you type with the other, every single night. The bank pays for it if you're still here after 7 p.m. You can't remember the last time you left before 7 p.m. But the pitch books aren't even the hard part. The real work is the financial models. You build DCFs that project 5 years of free cash flow for companies worth billions of dollars. You build merger models that run 40 tabs deep, linking 3 separate companies' financial statements into one integrated analysis. Accretion dilution models where changing one assumption by 0.5% could flip the entire deal thesis, and every single number has to be perfect, because if it's not, someone eventually will find it. Friday at 6 p.m., you're about to leave for the first time this week before midnight. Your MD walks over. I just got a call. The client wants a completely new analysis by Monday morning. I need a full industry overview, 20 company comps, and a football field chart. Let's plan on having a draft to me by Sunday night. Your weekend just disappeared. This is a weekly occurrence. Some nights you don't go home at all. You learn which conference rooms have couches long enough to sleep on. You keep a toothbrush in your desk drawer. Your gym bag sits untouched under your desk for months. Your apartment becomes a place you visit between shifts. Your rent is $4,000 a month for a Manhattan studio you barely see. You have a refrigerator with nothing in it except leftover seamless from 3 days ago. Your friends stop inviting you out after a while. They get tired of hearing I'm stuck at work. Your relationship doesn't survive the first 6 months. You realize that 80 to 100 hours a week doesn't leave room for much of a life outside of this building. The one perk that keeps you going is the car service. work past 9 p.m., and the bank sends you home in a black car. You start to notice you use it every single night. That's not a perk. That's a warning sign. But then you see your work out in the world. The pitch book you rebuilt at 3 a.m. after 47 comments. The merger model you stress tested at midnight until every sensitivity case checked out. The managing director presents it to a billion-dollar client like it was effortless. Like it always existed. Your name is nowhere on it. You'll never get credit in the room. But you know the truth. You built every single page. Then bonus season arrives. February, first year. Your managing director tells you the number. $85,000. On top of your base salary. You're 23 years old and you just made over $200,000 in a single year. You go out with your analyst class that night. Everyone's celebrating. For one evening, the fire drills and the 3 a.m. comments and the missed birthdays feel almost worth it. Almost. Year 2. You're faster now. The models that used to take you 12 hours, you can build in 4. The formatting is muscle memory. You know which MDs are reasonable and which ones will send you 47 comments at 3 a.m. for sport. But the hours don't change. 80 hours is a quiet week. 100 is a live deal week. And somehow, you've learned to function on 5 hours of sleep like it's normal. Year 3. You're the senior analyst now. New first years come to you with the same terrified look you had 2 years ago. They ask you how to format a waterfall chart, how to handle a difficult VP, how to survive their first fire drill. You know every shortcut, every workaround, every unwritten rule of this place. You've become exactly what you once looked up to, and your total compensation crosses $300,000. 3 years. You survived what most people can't even imagine. Over $700,000 earned before your 25th birthday. And now comes a question that nobody prepared you for. A question that will define the rest of your career. Do you stay in banking and climb the ladder? Or do you take the exit and walk into something new? Because the headhunters have been calling you since your 6th month on the desk. Private equity funds, hedge funds, venture capital. They all recruit from the same place, top banking analyst programs. They want you because you've been through the fire. You can model anything, you can work under insane pressure, and you never miss a deadline. Private equity offers $200,000 base plus a share of the profits, called carry, that could be worth millions over time. Better hours, fewer fire drills, a different kind of grind. But then your VP pulls you aside. Listen, you're on the promote list, associate, no MBA needed. You stay, your base jumps to $200,000. Bonus could hit $250,000. You'd be making close to $500,000 a year by 26. You stay, associate, and the role flips completely. Now you're the one sending comments at midnight. You're reviewing the analysts' models, catching their mistakes before the VP sees them. You're managing deal timelines, running conference calls, and keeping 10 work streams moving at once. And for the first time in your career, you're in the room. Not behind the scenes building the deck. You're presenting it. You're speaking directly to the CEO of a company about why they should acquire their competitor. You're answering questions in real time. Clients start to know your name, and when they call the bank, sometimes they ask for you specifically. Vice President, $500,000 to $700,000 a year. But the game changes completely at this level. It's no longer about the models. It's not about the technicals. It's about politics, internal relationships. Which managing directors do you align with? Which clients trust you enough to bring you to their board meetings? The VPs who figure out the political game get promoted. The ones who stay purely execution-focused get stuck. Your job now is no longer crunching numbers. It's taking Fortune 500 CEOs to dinner. Building relationships over years, not weeks. Becoming the person they call at 10 p.m. on a Sunday when they're thinking about selling their company. You're not just an investment banker anymore. You're a trusted advisor, a deal maker, and the skills that got you here, the Excel models, the pitch books, the all-nighters, they're completely irrelevant now. The only thing that matters is trust. Director, then managing director. 15 years from that first coffee chat in a campus Starbucks. Your compensation crosses $1 million. Some years it crosses $3 million. The top rainmakers at your bank make 5. You started as a sophomore in a hoodie who didn't know if he'd get a single interview. 347 applications, 2 years of cold emails and coffee chats, 1,000 nights in this office past midnight, countless moments where you seriously wondered if any of it was worth it. And now you're here, and now you're the one sitting on the other side of that interview table, looking at some nervous 20-year-old in an ill-fitting suit who reminds you exactly of yourself 15 years ago. They're trying so hard to sound smart without sounding desperate, and you look at them and you think, yeah, they have no idea what's coming, and you smile. Because 15 years ago, neither did you.